Welcome to the Create the Life You Want podcast, where we break down the journey of people just like you going from dream to ownership, business acquisitions, franchises, and startups. I'm your host, Jeremy Ames. Today's episode is brought to you ad-free by Guidant Financial. Guidant is America's leading company helping aspiring entrepreneurs use retirement funds to buy or start businesses. If you're committed to buying or starting a business, you can find out more about your funding options by going to www.guidantfinancial.com. That's Guidant financial.com. Now, let's get started with the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Create the Life You Want podcast. Today, I am joined by Terri Candelaria, and I'm excited to dig into her story. I believe she's on her third-ish career now, after 45 years in the corporate world working for big companies like Motorola and GE. So, Terri, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Why don't we start with that? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what you did before you went down the path of becoming a business owner?
Sure. I spent 45 years in a corporate career. I have an MBA, my undergrad, obviously, and I managed very large real estate portfolios for large companies. So I spent 25 years at Motorola in the semiconductor world, very high tech, managing facilities for them, and then spent another almost 14 years at GE, most of it in the industrial sector. My last job was managing facilities for what some people know as GE Medical Systems, which is where they make all of the medical equipment. I retired from there and came back to the Valley because I had been kind of moving around for GE, came back to the Phoenix area, and I spent the last 7 years before I retired at a pretty large financial institution, helping them build buildings and do some other things. Had an amazing, rewarding career, hugely impactful, was very good to me and my family, and absolutely grateful for all of those opportunities.
And how many times have you retired now? Because I counted at least 2.
Yes, actually, it's probably 3 because I put in enough years at Motorola to have gotten full retirement. I put in enough years at GE to get pension, which I'm also very grateful for. And then 7 years, then I just retired, as the 60-something people do.
Interesting. So one of the benefits of business then is that you have some income streams coming from these pensions that you spent time building up.
Yes.
That must have been a very nice benefit as you were first building up your company.
Yes, particularly in today's world where people don't have pensions. They're really only saving their 401ks if they have that opportunity, which is really wonderful now given where I am, because I'm now able to give that opportunity to others.
Yeah. Well, let's take a step back, Terri. I'm curious, did you always think you wanted to be a business owner? Or when did it occur to you, hey, I might want to do something other than this corporate job I've loved for 40 plus years?
Actually, that's an interesting story. Working for the financial institution in 2020, we had just, in the last couple of years prior to COVID, we had built these magnificent 2 office buildings for housing this financial institution. And it was really why they hired me, because I have a huge construction background. So we built these buildings, and just a year after the second building was occupied, COVID hit. Well, everybody had to go home. So we spent 2 weeks, me and a huge team of IT professionals and my facilities team, getting almost 3,000 people home with all of the technology, right? So they had to have computers and laptops because we had collections, we had customer service agents, we had salespeople, right? The whole gamut of what you would consider for a financial institution. And I come home one night and I said to my family, we were sitting around the dinner on a Friday night and my sons were with us. And I said, hey, there is going to be huge urban flight because people can work from anywhere in the world. Well, we owned a house up in the White Mountains here in Eastern Arizona. And my husband's family is from there. They've been up there for 150 years, right? They have all this legacy. And my oldest son said, would be awesome if we opened a small business in Springerville, where our home was. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Tell me more. Well, my husband and he like to smoke cigars. So when we were up there in the summers and it's beautiful weather and it's at 7,000 feet, they would sit out on the deck. They'd have a little cigar, little cocktail, kind of a relaxation, really get to um, kind of intimate conversations and that kind of thing. But they had to go 50 miles to get a cigar. That sort of higher end that they were looking for wasn't available to them at the Circle K or the drugstore or whatever. So my son said, we should open a smoke shop. There's nothing here. It's not for all of the communities around there. And I was like, let's do the research. Let's figure it out. And of course, we were able to, through some friends of mine, that we were able to find guidance that gave us the funding to allow us to do that. Because one of the things in small towns is very difficult. You have a very small main street. In many of these rural communities, they're very old. Buildings aren't well taken care of. The business owners are cash poor, typically, doing the absolute best they can, but there's nowhere to lease. There's nowhere to, and when a small parcel or suite comes up for lease, boy, they're snatched right up. Well, that's what we experienced, was finding somewhere to open, where we actually, because of guidance and because of the way we were able to fund it, we were actually able to go in and buy a piece of commercial property where we opened our first tobacco shop. And now we have since rented to other business owners. And then the other really wonderful thing about it is my oldest son has a 15-year-old son now. And at the time he was only 11, and everybody had went home and their kids were working online, right? It just didn't work for my grandson. And my son has total custody. They were in school up in the rural community. So for him to be able to move up, help us get this business started, kind of taking the front end and put his son back in school was a game changer for all of our lives.
Interesting. So when you started this business, it sort of came out of a whim, a problem that your family was having when they were out at your vacation property. And it sounds like you've been able to leverage some of your own experience with real estate and facilities management, right? With the location piece. How did you said you did the research. How did you figure out whether this smoke shop idea would be a good opportunity and sort of what to expect financially from it?
We had we did most of the research based in the valley, which is not, we know now that wasn't the way to go. That was not the best research. We should have been looking in the rural communities for comparison, for relevance. We were naive. We didn't realize that. So we had kind of what we thought we would make with the first smoke shop on a monthly basis. We did well beyond that, because what we found was in the rural community, there's no competition.
Interesting.
In the valley, for a tobacco store, they're every half a mile, right? So what we found was, in our innocence over the whole thing, was we are doing typically way better than anybody in the valley is doing for any single store, because we do not have the same competition. So it turned out to be a very successful venture. And then with the real estate portfolio, because it's a 7,000, we bought a building that had been abandoned for a couple of years. It's, it's old, but it sits on Main Street, which in Arizona, if you know that or have any listeners, it's the 60. So it's a pretty large truck route that heads to New Mexico. So we get a lot of truck traffic. We get a lot of tourists because it is up in the White Mountains. It's 7,000 feet. Beautiful in the summer, when it's really not so beautiful in the valley in the summer. So we ended up being, I mean, truthfully, way more successful than we ever anticipated because we were using really the wrong data.
So now it sounds like you're on an expansion binge. So tell us a little bit about where you've been heading and what your sort of overall vision is for where to take the company.
Yeah, so a few things have happened in the last 4 years. We were successful with the initial tobacco shop in the town of Springerville, which is in Apache County. And then it's about 50 miles from a town called Sholo, which has probably another 5,000 or 6,000 residents, permanent residents, than Springerville does. We do have competition in Sholo, but what we found when we decided we were going to open that tobacco shop in Sholo is that we were willing to provide service when perhaps some of our competition wasn't. So, i.e., we're open on Sundays, we're open at night, right? And some of the smaller business owners, particularly in these rural communities, will not be open on Sundays or they'll be closed of an evening.
I'm
So
curious.
we took advantage of that. We opened another shop in Sholo over a year ago now. It was actually in August. It is doing really better than Springerville, which we also did not anticipate because we do have competition within that community. But we are filling, again, a gap for the community because we're open when some of the other small business owners are not open. So people have kind of come to count on those extended hours.
Has there been any backlash with these other business owners in these small local towns that, you're coming in from another location, putting this business in and taking maybe some of what has been their market share that they could kind of coast on in the past?
No, but I think some of it is we don't necessarily take their market share because we've seen the numbers where 40% of our revenue is derived in the hours they aren't open.
Interesting.
So while there's probably some impact, I don't think there's a huge impact to them. And then we've done the things that you do as a retailer. You provide exceptional customer service. You provide an exceptional selection of product. You have hours that they want to come in. You provide a nice, clean, bright, airy store, and the people greeting you immediately are saying, "Hey, what can I help you with?" Right? And we also encourage our employees. We actually bonus our employees based on how a month or a quarter has gone, right? Because we understand they represent us, and they understand that the better customer service they provide, the more sales there are, the more money that is for them as well. So it's been really great. And we feel so good about it because we employ really good people, we pay well. We have not experienced the problem a lot of others have with the labor pool with COVID because we pay a little more an hour than everybody else does. We have incredibly reliable people. We give them, sometimes monthly, sometimes quarterly, and definitely a Christmas bonus, right? So we have Christmas coming up. Paychecks come out this Friday, and they will get their bonus so that it's in time for Black Friday. And that helps them see the benefit of their good work, and then it helps us see the benefit of their good work.
So, Terri, before we started the call, you had shared with me that you had earned your MBA, you've earned your PMP certification, you've got a Six Sigma black belt. I'm just curious, as someone who's been trained to the highest level in corporate America, how have you been able to put some of those skills to work with these small businesses?
I think a lot of it, I frankly have to give my son a shout out because what we learned with him running the front end operations, because he runs the stores, the inventory, hires, takes care of the employee interactions, takes care of the customers that might not be as happy, right? He's really running the front end operations. And then I run all of the back end operations. And that was a beautiful thing for us to recognize that he's such a natural entrepreneur, right? His ideas, that was a big piece of it. For me, I spent my life in a service industry, right? So I understood how important customer service was. I understood that while the customer is generally right, there's typically what I call three sides to every story, right? There's the customer's story, there's the clerk's story, and then there's somewhere in between that we can manage to try to fix whatever it was that the customer thought went wrong. So I think some of that for me, that legacy from my previous careers was huge. And being able then to coach my son, the people that work for us, when those issues happen, to kind of be that mediator that says, okay, this is how we resolve this for the customer so we don't lose a customer, right? What is the old saying? A customer will tell one person that they got great service, but they'll tell 10 people that they got bad service.
Yeah.
To be able to put that to a halt and continue a reputation that we believe we've built of amazing service. So I think probably the other thing, just to kind of extend that conversation with my previous, because I did manage large real estate portfolios. Once we bought the commercial building and we started recognizing the gap for people not being able to open their own small businesses in that town that has huge economic impact, was there was nowhere for them to lease, right? People can't go buy a building to open a business. Typically, that's just not the way it works. Now, guidance certainly gives you that opportunity. It gave me that opportunity. But as a result of seeing that gap, what I did was bought buildings when they come up on the market. In fact, they hadn't really even come up on the market, but they had been empty for years. We bought the first one, and well, the one that we're housed in with the smoke shop, of course, that one had been abandoned for over 2 years. The next one that we bought had been abandoned for over 3 years. We bought it, we cleaned it up, we marketed it to be able to sell it. And then people came in and bought it. And now 2 businesses are housed in that building that had been abandoned for 3 years. So there's 2 sales tax paying businesses in that building today as a result of us working with the people to allow them to buy it so that they could rent it and they could use it for their own small business. We bought one last year. It had been empty for 7 years. Sits right on Main Street, sits in front of a Safeway strip mall. I mean, like prime real estate. It had been empty for 7 years. It's a restaurant. And it was in just deplorable condition, right? So we go in, we clean it up, we market it, we get a lot of interest, but again, people are not able to afford to buy something like that. We weren't interested in leasing that. We wanted to sell it. So we worked a deal with a gentleman that owns a restaurant in a small community in Pacha County, about 25 miles from Springerville, that wanted to open a second restaurant, but in Springerville. So he gave us a small down and we carry the loan for him. So he owns the building. Has a very successful venture going on. He already had a reputation out there. So people love the fact that he was coming into town. And again, you now have, people have a place to work. The town collects sales tax, and there's an extra restaurant in this very small town that wasn't there before, that gives another opportunity for people to have something to do. So it has really been impactful with being able to buy these buildings, get them cleaned up, show people the possibilities, and then now you have literally empty, boarded up buildings that had been abandoned with small business people in there having success and impacting the town's revenues.
Okay, Terri, there's a couple big things that I think you just hinted on here. It must be incredibly fulfilling for you, because I'm hearing 2 things that happen. One is you took this idea for a small business and it's created this avenue for you to have maybe a different relationship with your son, where you're also allowing him to flourish and find another side of who he is and what he can contribute. And in going down this path of doing that, your you know your real estate eyes were looking at what was happening there in rural America and saying there is such a huge missed opportunity here, and you've turned that into something that's helping revitalize some of these rural areas that have been so negatively impacted potentially over the
Yes.
last 20 to 25 years. So where do you want to dive in first, Terri? I want to hear, like, what has it been like for you personally to go down this path? And then maybe I want to hear a little bit about the relationship with your son and what you were expecting versus how this has all played out.
I think since we have really incorporated the family in the business, even though the guidance relationship is mine because of the way the IRS views the guidance relationship and the client relationship, the business is family. And that has been incredible for all of us because we have been able to, we are all striving for the same goals, right? We're all striving for the same legacy. We're all understanding that impacts that we have on our customers, on our community, and on each other. So that has been incredible. And my relationship with my oldest son, I mean, I talk to him like 4 or 5 times a week. We go to dinner when I'm in town, when he's here. We constantly are talking ideas, right? We don't talk about what awful may have happened in the world today. We were constantly talking about ideas. What's next? What else could we be doing, right? And it's so fun. It's so fun to do that with my children who are frankly in their 40s, right? And to do it with my husband as well, where we're sitting around the dinner table and we're not gossiping and we're not complaining. It's always this upbeat set of ideas, possibilities, what's next, how do we do the next project? How do we fund the next project? What is the next project? So very exciting and gratifying with the impact that we know we have made in the town and the small business owners that we see thriving. I mean, thriving in those spaces. It is, these are not, you hear that 1 out of 10 small businesses make it. In a rural community, when you're filling a gap, I personally believe your percentage goes way up.
Interesting.
And that's what we see with these businesses that have taken over these buildings. They're still there. They're still doing amazing. The restaurant is one of the most popular places in town. It's family owned, local business. They're all thriving. And to be just the little part of that, it's incredible. It's incredible. I can't tell you how grateful we all are for the relationship changes, the impact that we believe we're making on other people's lives, our employees, our customers, and then the broader community.
How, because like you guys were new to the community, at least your son being there full time. So, in that impact to the community, how has the community embraced this? What kind of feedback and connection have you built there?
My son will tell you that people say to him, "Oh, are you Xander's dad?" That's his son. So people really know the kid a little more than they know him. Interestingly enough, because it's a small town, right? So, but I think that he could tell you amazing stories of people coming in and saying, "Gosh, we're so glad you're here. You guys are just doing a great job. We appreciate that so much." Even having been stopped by a policeman, and the policeman realizes who he is, and he's like, "Hey, oh, okay, I know who you are. Appreciate that. You go and have a nice day." And he wasn't really doing anything wrong. It's just kind of what they do. In truth, he drove a really loud vehicle. So I think, people know who he is. People know that impact. I'm more, in the background, I know the town government people where I'm getting permits and paying for business licenses and working out certificates of occupancy and that kind of thing, and have a great relationship with them. So yeah, but for them, it was life changing, and my grandson has just thrived in the smaller community, in the schools, as a result of him having moved there. And it's just he and his son that live there full time.
I'm curious, Terri, we've been talking about a lot of the good things, the unexpectedly beneficial parts of going down this path. Let's talk about some of the challenges. When you were trying to get this open, what things did you encounter that you weren't expecting or that you had to learn some tough lessons around?
So taking on these old buildings, even the first old building was really a shock for me. Just you don't have bathrooms in the suites, right? The town has just gotten mature or sophisticated enough to make sure that building codes are being met. So dealing with some of that to get certificate of occupancy sometimes was startling. Not being able to find good contractors in the White Mountains. There's a lot of contractors, but there's so much work that the really good contractors are crazy busy. By the way, there is a huge opportunity up there if you're a plumber, electrician, or a general contractor, a roofer. So I think that was being in the valley. You just pick up the phone, you call a registered contractor. Pretty good chance you're going to get a decent contractor. You're going to get good work. They're going to show up. In the White Mountains, that becomes a little more difficult. So timing the schedule that I lived my career by sometimes just goes right out the window because there's so much you can't control in the smaller communities that you probably have a little more control in the larger valley. So learning how to navigate that, learning who you could trust, learning who you could work with, establishing relationships when you found those resources, all really critical, but sometimes very frustrating when we intended to open on this particular date and there was just no way that was going to happen given the circumstances for getting everything ready.
But there's no interest by you and your family in starting a plumbing, electrical, roofing business?
So I mentioned earlier that I come from a construction background, and it certainly crossed our minds on occasion to kind jump into that and see if we could solve some of those problems, particularly because I think we do a really good job with keeping great employees, reliable employees, making sure that they're satisfied employees. But it's that the entire industry is shorthanded. It doesn't matter where you're at. There is a shortage of those trades. And fortunately, this country looks like they're getting ready to go through a process of trying to get people back into the trades, to give them opportunity to get that education, to get those journeyman licenses. But it's a ways off before you have enough of those resources, I think.
Yeah.
It's the one thing you can't do with AI. You're not going to put a new toilet in with AI, right? So it's a very shorthanded industry. It's a very critical industry. And hopefully, I think we're starting to see that, and others are now trying to figure out how to alleviate that labor shortage that they have with those really highly skilled trades.
Yeah. It's clear there's a big gap and an opportunity there. I'm curious though, Terri, because a lot of people who are operating these smaller businesses, they are dealing with employees that maybe aren't always super dependable, that maybe aren't getting paid the most money. So why don't you talk a little bit more? You mentioned a few of the benefits you do, but maybe you could talk sort of philosophically about what you have put in place in your business that has helped retain and attract really good people that you've been able to hold on and invest in.
One of the things that we do is we recruit, right? So when we have an opening, we don't just put that out there on Facebook and say, hey, we have an opening. we actually go look for that customer service oriented individual that has served us in some capacity, and then see if we can get them to come to work for us. We pay usually a little more than what they're making. Sometimes our hours are a little more flexible if we can get some of the other employees to flex around what they need. And we offer the 401k, right? So they can save their money. We have a process for them to be able to start to build their own savings, their own legacies, if you will, if they choose to take care of that. So as a result of that, I have the very first hire in Springerville, he's still with us. Our very second hire in Springerville, he's still with us, right? And now we're over 4 years that we've been open. And through all of that, they're still with us. And we're still really pleased. And and the nice thing is that they're now able to go work at the other shop when we're shorthanded in the other shop, and vice versa, right? Because we've now built this reliable group of people who care about their customers, our customers.
And you. And Terri, maybe you could talk a little bit. You had mentioned recruiting. You go out and actively try and find these people.
Mhm.
Could you talk about some of the ways you do that? Are you guys going out to lunch every other day and you're just looking to poach people from
You know,
restaurants or the grocery store or what?
yeah, really just in your daily, my son does this more often, but my husband, for instance, my husband had gone and got his hair cut, and the woman that washed his hair had said, "Oh, I just wish she was kind of complaining about her job."
Yeah.
And she was very friendly and outgoing and clearly, an intelligent woman that was just looking for something a little more. Went home, told my son about her, and she went to work for us, right? So that is the kind of thing. We have somebody that they were at a Panda Express, and she was just so cheerful and happy to serve us and happy to take care of your problems, right? You find those people that just have that inherent ability to make you feel like you're being well served. And we try to then recruit those people to come work for us and put those same traits to work for our benefit, as
Which is
well as theirs, frankly.
Yeah, which is brilliant. You're not getting the interview face of someone. You're seeing them in a real live role and how they show up and work with customers. You're
Right.
using
Right.
some of the strategy.
And we require them to provide us with a resume too. Now, this is a clerk counter job, right? We train them what to do, how to do that. But the reason that we ask for a resume is because it shows initiative, right? It shows a desire beyond just saying, yeah, I'd like to work here. So it's not just us recruiting those people, but it's also then asking them to go that next step to prove that they are in that for the long haul, their own initiative, their own betterment, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I want to take a step back, Terri, and go back to the formation of the company and really dig into a little bit more about some of the research you did and how you prepared yourself to be successful. So I'd love for you to explain what things you did specifically to understand the industry and then how you use that to formulate your assumptions or your projections about what were going to happen. And then we can get into some of the details around what actually did happen.
Yeah. I mean, Google was the primary source of so much to be able to go out and see what is an average tobacco shop doing. The other thing we did was in the Valley, we actually went to several tobacco shops to see what people were offering, talked to the clerks, had quite a few that were very open about what they were generating in a day, which of course translated to that month, to the year, what their customers felt was important to them when they stepped in, what products primarily that they were selling. Um, really did a lot of those, right? Just going into other people's stores and didn't, we're not competing with anybody in the Valley,
Yeah.
right? So that was the nice thing to be able to say, look, we're not here to compete with you. We're going to be in a rural community that's frankly 250 miles away, right? It's not close. And as a result of that, some of those people were just generous with the amount of information they provided for us. So it gave us, although it was anecdotal, we weren't looking at anybody's books, of course, but it really gave us at least a range that we thought we could start with. And then what we found in the rural community, of course, was because we didn't have the saturation they have in the Phoenix area, the lack of competition served us really well.
So, did you build a set of projections, Terri? How did you figure out how much this investment was going to cost? And so you could build your financing plan around getting it open.
Right. So initially it was finding the space. That took us the longest, actually. We started this process early April. We did not get into business until October 12th of that same year. So it was a 6-month process because we just couldn't find anywhere to open. Because initially, right, you just want to lease. You would just want to go in and pay your monthly thing and have your space, and you're not responsible for anything else. So was not an option. It did not exist. So that was why we started looking at buildings to buy. And we looked at several options and settled on the one that we're in. But that changed the financing, as you can imagine, right? Because initially it was like, okay, we need this much for our display cabinets. We need this much for our inventory. We need this much if we have construction that we need to do in a space. All of the things that go into getting into business, even the business license, which turns out to be fairly minor. If you don't get all of that stuff up front, you don't get your COO, right? You don't get your certificate of occupancy to even open the business. So all of those, going through those details, doing the research, how much is it, and then coming up with a figure that we thought we needed to be in business, which included first month's rent, last month's rent, if there was a security deposit, and then the space changes that we would need to put in the business. That was initially what we did. When we found that we couldn't find any place to rent, that was location, right? That was when we decided that we would see if we could use one of these buildings that were not on the market, but people certainly will listen to your offer. And that's how we ended up in the building that we're in. And it turned out to be a beautiful location. As it turns out, it's on Main Street. As you come in, we have incredible signage ability, really nice marquee, great parking, right? All of those kinds of things.
So, if you don't mind sharing, when you calculated it all up of what you thought it was going to cost you to get the store open, about what was that number? And then how did that change when you realized, oh no, we're going to have to do the real estate? That might have changed your whole financing plan, right? Because you probably also took on some debt relative
It absolutely did. I mean, originally we thought that to make sure that we had plenty of cash flow until the business started to kind of take it off, we thought we would be good with about $100,000 to $125,000, which is very generous, actually. I think you could probably do it for less, but we didn't want to be so cash poor that we were making short-term decisions.
Yeah.
So we wanted to give ourselves really a little more bandwidth financially so that we could put in nice humidors and make sure that the space was bright and airy and all of those kinds of things. And then we didn't know how long it would take for us to start to make money. And we knew we'd need employees. So 125 is kind of where we started. We ended up, way more than that because we paid 205 for the first building that we bought. But it's over 7,000 square feet. And now, of course, it generates its own revenue because we're renting it. And then, of course, the benefit of having your own business is under our corporation that Guidant helped us set up, we have the LLCs for the business, one of those being the real estate LLC. So our tobacco shop pays rent to the LLC. That's the real estate portfolio. So it helps from a tax point of view, it helps keep the buildings maintained. It helps additional funding when we want to go flip another building, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about the building because, first of all, love the rural real estate prices. $200,000 for a 7,000.
For over 7,000 feet, right? And
But
sitting on a little over an acre. I even have a little plot that's not being used.
yeah, so there's really three types of money going on here, right? You're going to have to bring some more money as a down payment on that than probably getting a loan from the bank. But I'm guessing if this thing has been abandoned for 2 years, you're also having to put a lot of money into updating and retrofitting this to fit the current code. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that process and how that's played out for you.
Yeah, there's no question. So we are debt free. We did not go to a bank.
Cash.
We used the guidance opportunity to buy that building.
Okay.
So that is the benefit, right, of using your product for our benefit to get into business. So we bought the building, and as a result of that, yeah, we had to put in a new roof and right, all of those things as a result of that. But again, we just managed to influx enough money, sell enough stock, if you will,
Yep.
to be able to manage all of that. And then as these years have passed, we generate the money that we need for the upkeep. I just had several $1,000s worth of electrical work done. I just got a bid to have a suite completely upgraded. It's one that is sitting abandoned within that building that I haven't yet rented. And just hadn't had the time to kind of get it going. But I'm getting ready to completely overhaul that. We're putting in a new restroom. We're putting in some large doors. We're going to change the flooring. We're tearing out some of the old fixtures that were probably put in the 60s or the 70s, right? And really upgrading all of that, from the lighting to the restroom to the larger doors that allow you to have product come in and out if that's who was going to rent it. But we don't have to borrow money to do that, right? So as the businesses having their own success, we're able to take care of that. So we are debt free, with the exception of one. I do have a piece of land that the owner carried. So I gave her half down and she carried the rest of it, but that'll be paid for in May. And it's a piece of land that sits right downtown in Springerville on the main drag, that we have other ideas for in the future.
Yeah. So to clarify for the listeners, you took retirement funds, invested them in this corporation, and you had enough in retirement funds to bring the cash to bear, not only to open the business, but also to be able to purchase this real estate, which, by the way, I think is the most brilliant part about this, Terri. You went down this path not expecting to leverage any of your expertise in real estate, and all of a sudden it's become a key component of what you're doing with the business. So
Yes.
I'm curious, how are you structuring that? The first building, obviously, you bought within the corp structure with the rollover. Have you done the same thing with every corresponding one, where you're just using now cash from the business to go out and do these other real estate acquisitions, or are you treating?
Yes. Yeah, okay. We've not had to borrow money, with the exception of this one piece of land, and that's really just hanging on to your cash. If somebody's willing to finance it that way and you can make that work, it's just a great way to hang on to your cash with somebody carrying the loan for you. But normally, we could have paid cash for it. We just had an opportunity to not pay cash for it.
Why not?
So yeah, the businesses wholly are funding any expansion that we've wanted to do. When we flipped the buildings, we made a little money on them. We're not getting rich doing this, right? But I think on the first building, just to give you a sense, I think we cleared $50,000. So it was like a $70,000 adder that we ended up selling it for $70,000 more than we paid for it. But after all expenses, I think we cleared about $50,000. The second building, the restaurant, we didn't make much at all in that, and we probably $30,000. The benefit, though, is I carry that loan, So I have this nice little 8% interest coming in.
Yep.
That's just a good investment, right? It's the stable, every month, 8% comes in on my money, right? So that has been what was great with the initial success and giving ourselves some window of opportunity with the cash, not keeping ourselves so cash poor that we didn't have other opportunities, so that when we've seen them, we were able to take advantage of them.
Yeah, well, Terri, you sound like you're having a massive amount of fun doing what you're doing with your family and building these things. I'm just curious though, because at some point you might be thinking about your fourth retirement. So, how are you thinking about the future of the business? Is this something you think you might build up and maybe sell to your son? Is this something you might sell component pieces off to people? Like, how are you thinking about the future, or are you just sort of focused on the next, window
We
of
have,
time?
my husband and I have kind of a 10-year plan. As I mentioned, I'm now into my late 60s. So, what is wonderful about this is because I am retired, I spend 25 hours probably a week with all of the back end of the businesses and making sure everything gets done. But I dictate when that is, right? I may be working on a Sunday afternoon if I have time. I try to work just like Tuesday to Thursday, in truth. um, so that's fantastic. But the secondary benefit is that we use our brains, right? We're not just sitting around watching television. We're not just sitting around on social media. We are actively doing projects, getting involved in the businesses, and using our brains for ideas and getting things done and being doers. It makes such a difference in the quality of our lives in this stage of our lives. And of course, the secondary benefit is, with me retiring, my husband had been retired for about 15 years prior to me retiring, because when I went with GE and they started moving me all over, he took early retirement so they could go, right? So it's turned out to be great. But we replaced that income. So that's kind of what we look at, is continuing to build our investments, to continue to build the portfolio. We now have the opportunity to bring our family into the business, even to the point where we're now looking at the possibility of opening like a furniture store, a used quality furniture store, because there's a gap in that area where people can't get somebody to deliver or to take stuff out of their house. Anyway, so that we would literally set our grandkids on the couch, use them as models for our advertising efforts, and pay them, right, in a Roth situation to start to build wealth for even my grandchildren. So there's just so much legacy that we want to build over the next 10 years. And yes, you're right. I think we, at some point, then we either sell it and split it with my extended family, or if my son chooses to continue that process, then we just figure out what the monetary means for all of us to benefit from that kind of an arrangement. Plus, my youngest son he retires in just 2.5 years. So then we anticipate him coming into the business full time once that happens.
It's so interesting, Terri, listening to you talk, because it's almost like you've built a solution for an active retirement, meaning you sort of see that you're working the hours you want, you're working on sort of passion projects that connect in with your family. It's keeping you maybe younger and more engaged and more relevant than you would be otherwise. And it doesn't sound like you want to give that up. All those things are part of the life. I'm curious, is this part of the life you envisioned, or is it just one of those things that you've sort of fallen into and now you're like, wow, I wouldn't want to give this up?
Jeremy, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I have fallen into opportunity all of my life. I didn't set out to be a facilities manager. All of those kinds of opportunities have been doors that I've chosen to go through. But It wasn't something that I've planned on. Now, with owning the business, we now are pretty deliberate about those plans and those projects. But you're so right. It's being an entrepreneur. I can't express this enough for people. It is scary. It can be stressful. It's all on you, but no employer is loyal to you. And I don't mean to badmouth the corporate world. I benefited greatly from that world, but it's also changed a lot since I entered that world. And you finding a place in that entrepreneurship where you love what you're doing, you love the people you're serving, you're filling a gap that the world needs you to fill, and you're using your own creativity, you're using your own energy, bringing your own passion to it. Nothing is more fulfilling. Nothing. And Guidant gives you the opportunity to do that with the money you have already put aside, tax-free. Tax-free, because once you take your 401k at age 70, where you start having to take it, it's taxable at whatever rate is in place. The way that this process works, you get to use your 401k money for your own investment, for using your talent to create that income for yourself, but you are literally doing it tax-free. Not that my company doesn't pay taxes, it most certainly does. But my personal income, I also pay my personal income taxes, but my 401k that was tax deferred when I put that dollar in is being used to build this business at no tax burden.
Yeah, what's interesting, Terri, is you're coming up on required minimum distributions here in a few years, and
much less than you think.
But the income streams that you have from the real estate and from the cash flow of the business make it really easy for you to just continue what you're doing, right? You just will end up pulling some cash out via dividends back to your retirement plan to then issue those required minimum distributions, which at this point,
that's exactly right.
Yeah. It's brilliant.
And of course, now that you have the opportunity to take those distributions and throw it right into your Roth, right?
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of having the business paying for our daily requirements, because even though we'll have to take those minimum distributions, we don't have to use it.
Yeah.
We can reinvest it, and it stays tax-free.
Well, Terri, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story. Most of the clients and entrepreneurs I talk with are before retirement age. And so their 10-year plan is all about how they're getting out of the business. And yet you are someone who went through the entire scope of your corporate career, retired 3 times, and then decided to do this, which is pretty unique. But you've been able to turn it into a real family enterprise that sounds like it's built some connectivity, and the energy I feel from you is incredible. Yeah. I'm not sure that I see that many people in their late 60s who are so vibrant and full of life. And it sounds like a lot of that comes from your engagement and what you do every day.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. This, nothing like talking about your favorite subject, yourself. So that was a great opportunity. I appreciate that.
Well, thanks, Terri. We appreciate you being on the show. Thanks for listening to the Create the Life You Want podcast. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to future episodes by clicking the subscribe button, you know where. If you're an aspiring business owner, you may also want to subscribe to the Create the Life You Want newsletter for more inspiration and tips delivered to your inbox every week. You can find the link to that in the show notes, as well as on my personal website, jeremyames.com. If you've already decided you want to start or buy a business, consider exploring your financing options by heading to our sponsor's website at www.guidantfinancial.com. That's GUIDANT financial.com. See you in the next episode.